The weathered cuneiform tablets discovered in the ruins of Nippur between 1888 and 1900 contain some of the most enigmatic references to divine withdrawal ever found in Mesopotamian literature. Among the thousands of fragments catalogued by the University of Pennsylvania expeditions, a particular group of late-period Sumerian texts stands out for their unusual content, describing what scholars have termed the Great Departure. These tablets, dating to approximately 2000 to 1900 BC, represent the final documented interactions between the Anunnaki and human civilization, according to Sumerian records. The most significant of these tablets, designated as CBS 10673 in the University Museum's collection, contains a detailed account written in archaic Sumerian script that differs markedly from contemporary administrative documents. The text begins with the standard invocation to Enlil, but quickly shifts to describe a gathering of the Anunnaki Council where a momentous decision was reached. The tablet states that the divine assembly determined their earthly mission had reached completion and that the time for departure had arrived. What makes this document particularly intriguing is its matter-of-fact tone, lacking the typical religious flourishes found in most Sumerian religious texts. Archaeological evidence from Nippur itself supports the narrative found in these tablets. Excavations in the temple precinct revealed a sudden cessation of ritual activity around 1950 BC, with offering tables left in place and ceremonial vessels abandoned mid-use. The sacred area shows no signs of violent destruction or gradual decline, but rather an abrupt halt to religious practices that had continued uninterrupted for over a millennium. Similar patterns emerge at other major Sumerian religious centers, suggesting a coordinated withdrawal from temple activities across the region. The evidence we're about to examine spans archaeological discoveries, astronomical calculations, prophetic literature, and underground preservation systems that together suggest the Anunnaki departure was temporary, with specific protocols established for monitoring their eventual return. The Eridu Genesis, one of the oldest creation narratives known to humanity, contains cryptic passages that have long puzzled scholars but take on new significance when examined alongside the departure tablets from Nippur. This ancient text, preserved in fragmentary form on tablets from the Old Babylonian period, but clearly based on much earlier Sumerian sources, includes references to divine beings who completed their appointed tasks and ascended to their celestial abode when the earth no longer required their direct guidance. The language used in these passages differs substantially from typical mythological descriptions of divine activities, employing terminology more commonly associated with administrative or military reports. Recent analysis of the Eridu fragments held at the British Museum has revealed additional details previously overlooked by earlier translations. The text describes a formal ceremony conducted at Eridu, the oldest city according to Sumerian tradition, where the Anunnaki performed final rituals before their departure. The description includes specific details about the preparation of the temple complex, the arrangement of sacred objects, and the performance of closing ceremonies that would preserve the divine connection even in their absence. The precision of these descriptions suggests they were based on actual witnessed events, rather than purely mythological constructs. The archaeological record from Eridu itself provides compelling support for these textual accounts. Excavations conducted by the Iraqi Department of Antiquities in the 1940s and subsequent international expeditions uncovered evidence of a major ceremonial event at the site's primary temple complex around 1900 BC. The temple's inner sanctum contained elaborate arrangements of votive objects, precious metals, and ceremonial tools that appear to have been deliberately positioned and then sealed. Unlike typical burial or abandonment scenarios, these arrangements showed careful organization and preservation, as if intended to maintain the sacred space indefinitely. The Eridu Genesis describes the departure ceremony as occurring over a period of 12 days, coinciding with specific astronomical events that the text documents with remarkable precision. Tablet fragments from the University of Pennsylvania collection indicate that these astronomical markers included the heliacal rising of particular stars and a planetary conjunction that occurred only once every several centuries. The mathematical calculations required to predict and document these celestial events demonstrate astronomical knowledge far exceeding what conventional archaeology attributes to early 2nd millennium Mesopotamian civilization. The ceremonial protocols described in the Eridu Genesis include detailed instructions for maintaining the temple complex in a state of perpetual readiness for potential divine return. These instructions specify exact procedures for cleaning, offerings, and astronomical observations that must be performed at regular intervals. The text indicates that selected priests received special training in these maintenance procedures and that this knowledge was to be transmitted through hereditary priesthoods across generations. Archaeological evidence from Eridu reveals that these maintenance activities continued for centuries after the supposed departure, with offering deposits and ritual objects appearing in stratified layers that extend well into the first millennium BC. The Eridu text contains explicit statements about the temporary nature of the departure, describing it not as permanent abandonment but as a strategic withdrawal that would allow humanity to develop independence, while maintaining the possibility of intervention during crisis periods. The text uses the Sumerian term namtila, which translates more accurately as appointed time of return rather than the conventional translation of eternal departure that appears in most academic treatments. This linguistic precision suggests that the Sumerian scribes who compiled the Eridu Genesis understood the departure as part of a cyclical pattern rather than a final ending. Comparative analysis with other Mesopotamian departure narratives reveals consistent details that appear across multiple independent sources. The Nippur tablets, the Eridu Genesis, and fragments from all describe the same 12-day ceremony, the same astronomical timing, and the same promises of eventual return under specific conditions. This consistency across different cities and different textual traditions argues strongly against dismissing these accounts as mythological invention. The level of coordination required to maintain such consistent narratives across multiple scribal centres suggests they were based on shared memories of actual historical events. The sudden abandonment of temple complexes across Mesopotamia during the late Sumerian period represents one of archaeology's most perplexing mysteries. At the Great Ziggurat complex shows evidence of abrupt cessation of maintenance and ritual activity around the same period. The temple's inner chambers contained partially completed renovation work, with tools and materials left exactly where workers had placed them. Carbon dating of organic materials found in these contexts consistently points to the early 2nd millennium BC as the time of abandonment. The ziggurat at excavated by Leonard Woolley between 1922 and 1934, revealed a pattern of abandonment that defies conventional explanations. The temple workshops contained bronze tools still arranged on workbenches, clay tablets with partially completed administrative records, and storage jars filled with grain and other supplies. The absence of any signs of warfare, fire, or natural disaster makes the sudden cessation of activity particularly mysterious. Woolley's excavation reports note that the abandonment appeared to have occurred during normal working hours, with activities simply stopping mid-task. The Temple of Nana at dedicated to the moon god, contained evidence of extensive preparations for closure rather than sudden abandonment. Excavations revealed that valuable cult statues had been carefully wrapped in linen and placed in protected chambers. Ceremonial vessels were cleaned and stored according to specific organizational systems, and architectural plans for future restoration work were sealed in waterproof containers. These preparations indicate that the temple personnel knew in advance that the complex would be closed and took systematic steps to preserve its contents for eventual reactivation. Similar patterns emerged at Lagash, where excavations conducted by French archaeologist Ernest de Sarzec in the late 19th century uncovered temple complexes that showed identical closure procedures. The Ningasu temple at Lagash contained sealed chambers filled with carefully organized ceremonial equipment, astronomical instruments, and administrative records that documented the final months of temple operations. Carbon dating and stratigraphic analysis confirmed that the closure occurred synchronously with the abandonments at and Nippur, suggesting coordinated action across the entire Sumerian religious network. At Kish, excavations by the Oxford Field Museum expedition in the 1920s revealed underground storage facilities beneath the main temple complex that contained preservation systems of remarkable sophistication. These facilities included chambers with controlled humidity, ventilation systems that maintained air circulation without external openings, and chemical treatments applied to walls and floors that created antimicrobial environments. The engineering required for these preservation systems exceeded documented Mesopotamian capabilities, suggesting access to advanced technical knowledge that was applied specifically to ensure long-term protection of stored materials. The synchronization of temple abandonments across multiple cities occurred within a remarkably narrow time frame. Stratigraphic analysis and carbon dating from Nippur, Lagash, Kish, and Uruk all point to closure activities occurring between 1950 and 1900 BC, a period of only 50 years. This degree of synchronization across cities separated by hundreds of kilometers indicates centralized coordination and planning rather than independent local decisions. The logistical organization required to orchestrate such widespread synchronized closure demonstrates administrative capabilities that presuppose advanced communication systems and hierarchical authority structures. Administrative tablets from the final years before abandonment show increasing allocations of resources toward what the texts describe as preparation for the time of silence. Records from document massive expenditures for preservation materials, construction of sealed storage facilities, and training of specialized priests in maintenance procedures. These financial records provide quantitative evidence that the temple closures were planned operations requiring substantial investment rather than emergency responses to unexpected crises. At Uruk, the situation presents even more dramatic evidence. The Anu temple complex, dedicated to the sky god and traditionally associated with Anunnaki worship, underwent extensive modifications in its final phase of use. Archaeological evidence suggests these modifications were not repairs or improvements, but rather systematic preparations for long-term closure. Drainage systems were sealed, valuable objects were carefully stored in protected chambers, and access points were permanently blocked using techniques that would preserve the interior spaces indefinitely. The Anu temple at Uruk, excavated by German archaeological teams beginning in 1912 and continuing through the 1930s, revealed construction techniques in its final phase that differed substantially from earlier building methods. The sealing of drainage systems involved the use of bitumen mixed with crushed limestone and rare mineral compounds that created waterproof barriers capable of withstanding millennia of groundwater pressure. Chemical analysis of these sealing materials revealed compositions that match formulas found in much later alchemical texts, suggesting preservation of specialized technical knowledge across extended time periods. The sealed chambers within the Anu temple contained not only ceremonial objects, but also what appeared to be technical equipment and astronomical instruments. Excavations uncovered bronze devices with precisely machined gears, crystalline lenses with optical properties indicating advanced grinding techniques, and metallic objects with unknown functions that showed no signs of corrosion despite their age. These artifacts were arranged systematically within the chambers, according to organizational principles that facilitated inventory and eventual retrieval, indicating that the sealing was intended as temporary preservation rather than permanent burial. Access points to the temple's inner sanctum were blocked using massive stone slabs fitted with precision that left no gaps for air or water infiltration. The engineering required to position these blocking stones, some weighing over 30 tons, demanded lifting and placement capabilities that conventional archaeology struggles to explain using documented ancient Mesopotamian technology. The precision of the fit and the absence of any apparent lifting mechanisms suggest either lost technologies or construction methods that have not been adequately reconstructed by modern researchers. The Uruk abandonment included documentation procedures that created detailed inventories of sealed materials and provided instructions for future reopening. Tablets found in outer chambers contained lists of objects stored in the sealed areas, descriptions of preservation procedures applied, and astronomical calculations indicating optimal times for eventual retrieval. These administrative records demonstrate that the closure was executed according to established protocols rather than improvised responses to emergency conditions. The White Temple at Uruk showed evidence of final ceremonies conducted immediately before sealing. Archaeological investigation revealed ash deposits from massive fires burned in the temple courtyard. Chemical residues from incense and offerings burned in quantities far exceeding normal ritual use, and arrangements of objects that corresponded to descriptions of closing ceremonies found in the Eridugenesis. The scale and elaboration of these final rituals indicate that the temple closure was treated as an event of tremendous religious and cultural significance. The timing of the Uruk closure correlated precisely with astronomical events documented in contemporary observational records. Babylonian astronomical texts from the period describe unusual celestial phenomena, including bright objects moving across the sky along specific trajectories and planetary configurations that occurred only at intervals of thousands of years. The correlation between these astronomical events and the temple closures suggests that the departure timing was determined by celestial calculations rather than terrestrial political or social factors. Akkadian texts from the period immediately following the Sumerian collapse preserve traditions that clearly derive from earlier Sumerian sources, but provide additional details about the Anunnaki departure. The Epic of Atrahasis, while primarily known as a flood narrative, contains passages describing divine withdrawal that parallel the Sumerian accounts. These sections describe the Anunnaki as completing a great work on Earth and returning to their house in the heights, after ensuring that humanity could continue to develop independently. The Atrahasis epic exists in multiple versions, with the most complete preserved on tablets from the Library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, dating to the 7th century BC but clearly based on Old Babylonian originals from around 1700 BC. The portions dealing with divine departure employ specialized vocabulary that appears nowhere else in Akkadian literature, suggesting these passages were copied from even older Sumerian sources that were already archaic when the Akkadian version was compiled. The epic describes a formal assembly of the Anunnaki, where they evaluated humanity's progress and determined that direct oversight was no longer necessary. The text provides specific criteria used in this evaluation, including measurements of agricultural productivity, population levels, technological capabilities, and social organization complexity. These quantitative assessments demonstrate that the departure decision was based on objective metrics rather than subjective judgments, suggesting a systematic approach to monitoring human development. The Atrahasis text describes the establishment of human intermediaries who would maintain contact with the departed Anunnaki through specialized ritual procedures. These intermediaries, selected from priestly families that demonstrated specific genetic and intellectual qualifications, received extensive training in astronomical observation, symbolic communication, and preservation of sacred knowledge. The epic indicates that this training took place during the final years before departure, and that the selected intermediaries were bound by oaths to maintain the protocols across generations. The departure protocols described in Atrahasis include detailed instructions for maintaining temple complexes in states of readiness, conducting regular astronomical observations to monitor for signs of return, and preserving technical knowledge through encoded texts and oral traditions. These instructions were sufficiently detailed that later Babylonian priests could reconstruct operational procedures for equipment and systems whose original purposes had been forgotten, demonstrating the effectiveness of the knowledge preservation strategies. The epic contains explicit promises that the Anunnaki would return during periods of crisis when human civilization faced existential threats beyond its capacity to resolve. The text describes specific trigger conditions including environmental catastrophes, technological collapses, and social breakdowns that would exceed predetermined severity thresholds. These crisis indicators were defined with mathematical precision, providing quantitative criteria that could be objectively assessed by human observers monitoring for return conditions. Babylonian sources from the first millennium BC preserve even more detailed accounts of the Anunnaki departure, though these later texts show clear evidence of legendary embellishment. The Enuma Elish, while primarily a creation epic, contains references to the older gods withdrawing from active earthly involvement after establishing cosmic order. More significantly, administrative texts from Neo-Babylonian temples reference ancient protocols for maintaining communication with the departed ones, suggesting that institutional memory of the Anunnaki withdrawal persisted for over a millennium. The Enuma Elish, preserved on 7 tablets discovered at Nineveh and dating to the 1st millennium BC, contains passages that describe the departure of elder deities after they established fundamental cosmic structures. While these passages are often interpreted as purely mythological accounts of generational succession among gods, detailed linguistic analysis reveals terminology that parallels the administrative departure language found in earlier Sumerian texts. The epic describes these elder deities as retiring to distant realms while maintaining the ability to intervene in cosmic affairs during periods of chaos or disorder. Neo-Babylonian temple archives from Babylon, Borsippa, and Sippar contain administrative texts that reference ongoing maintenance of communication systems designed for contact with departed divine beings. Temple budgets from the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II, dating to the 6th century BC, include line items for preserving astronomical instruments, maintaining sealed chambers, and supporting priestly specialists trained in ancient communication protocols. These budget allocations demonstrate that Babylonian religious institutions continue to operate systems established over 1,000 years earlier during the original Anunnaki departure. Ritual calendars from Neo-Babylonian temples specify observances dedicated to maintaining readiness for divine return. These calendars, preserved on cuneiform tablets from multiple temple archives, describe ceremonies conducted at regular intervals that included astronomical observations, testing of communication equipment, and renewal of preservation treatments in sealed chambers. The precision of these ritual schedules and their correlation with astronomical cycles indicate that return preparation activities were conducted according to systematic protocols rather than vague religious customs. Training manuals for Babylonian priests, preserved in tablet series from temple libraries, include detailed instructions for operating equipment whose original functions were no longer fully understood. These manuals describe procedures for calibrating astronomical instruments, activating crystalline communication devices, and interpreting symbolic messages received through specialized ritual contexts. The technical complexity of these procedures and their preservation across centuries demonstrate institutional commitment to maintaining capabilities for eventual divine contact despite the passage of extensive time since the original departure. Temple archives from Babylon dating to the Neo-Babylonian period, but clearly based on much older sources, preserve detailed accounts of the final council sessions held at Nippur's temple complex. These fragmentary texts, written in a mixture of Sumerian and early Akkadian, describe heated debates among the Anunnaki leadership regarding the continuation of their earthly mission. The most complete account appears on Tablet Vati 9555, housed in the Vorderasiatisches Museum in Berlin. This remarkable document, first translated by German Assyriologist Erich Ebeling in 1928, but not fully understood until recent reanalysis by contemporary scholars, contains what appears to be a verbatim transcript of deliberations among the Anunnaki Council. The tablet opens with a formal dating formula that places the council session in the final months before the documented departure period, corresponding to approximately 1945 BC according to correlation with astronomical events mentioned in the text. The precision of the dating and the administrative format of the document suggest it was compiled from official council records rather than constructed as mythological narrative. The session transcript describes a gathering of 12 primary Anunnaki leaders at the temple, with additional observers and administrative personnel present to document the proceedings. The text names each participant and provides their specific areas of responsibility within the Anunnaki administrative structure. Anu presided as council chairman, with Enlil and Enki serving as primary spokesmen for opposing positions regarding the departure question. The presence of specialized scribes trained in rapid transcription techniques enabled the creation of detailed records that captured not only formal statements, but also spontaneous exchanges and emotional undertones of the debate. The council convened in the Chamber of the Great Decisions, a specific location within the complex that archaeological excavations have tentatively identified. German excavations at Nippur in the early 20th century uncovered a large rectangular chamber in the temple's central section that contained acoustic properties unusually well suited for group deliberation. The chamber's walls showed evidence of having once been lined with cedar panels and decorated with precious metals, consistent with descriptions in the tablet of the council meeting space. Stone benches arranged in a semicircular pattern could accommodate exactly 12 primary participants with additional standing room for observers. The tablet describes the council session lasting 3 full days and nights, with deliberations continuing without interruption, except for prescribed ritual observances at dawn and sunset. This extended duration indicates the gravity of the decision under consideration and the depth of disagreement among council members. The text notes that food and drink were provided to participants, but that formal meals were not observed, suggesting an atmosphere of crisis deliberation rather than ceremonial proceeding. The opening statements recorded in the tablet establish the fundamental question before the council: whether the appointed time for departure had arrived, or whether circumstances required extension of direct Anunnaki presence on Earth. The text indicates that this question had been under consideration for several years prior to the formal council session, with preliminary discussions and data gathering preparing the ground for final decision. References to earlier reports and previous deliberations suggest that the council operated according to established procedural protocols rather than making impulsive determinations. The tablet preserves detailed astronomical data presented to the council as evidence for timing the departure. This data included calculations of planetary positions, stellar alignments, and long-term cyclical patterns that supposedly determined optimal windows for interplanetary travel. The mathematical complexity of these calculations and their correlation with actual astronomical phenomena observable in the early 2nd millennium BC demonstrate that the council based its deliberations on sophisticated technical analysis rather than arbitrary religious symbolism. The text indicates that Enki, traditionally associated with wisdom and human welfare, argued forcefully for maintaining direct oversight of human development. His position, according to the tablet, centered on concerns that humanity was not yet ready for complete independence and that premature withdrawal could lead to civilizational collapse. The detailed transcription of his arguments demonstrates sophisticated understanding of human developmental requirements and technological dependencies. Enki's position, as recorded in the tablet, began with presentation of comprehensive data on human capabilities and limitations. He cited specific measurements of agricultural productivity, showing that recent drought years had stressed food production systems to near failure levels. Population statistics indicated that several major cities had experienced significant demographic decline due to disease outbreaks that human medical knowledge could not effectively counter. Technological assessments revealed that certain critical capabilities, particularly in metallurgy and astronomical calculation, remained heavily dependent on direct Anunnaki guidance and would likely deteriorate without continued supervision. The tablet records Enki presenting case studies of human settlements that had been granted increased autonomy as experimental tests of readiness for full independence. These experimental communities, according to his testimony, show disturbing patterns of technological regression and social fragmentation and inability to maintain complex irrigation systems without ongoing divine oversight. Enki argued that these experimental results demonstrated that complete withdrawal at the current time would result in widespread civilizational collapse within 2 to 3 generations. Enki's argument included detailed projections of likely human developmental trajectories under various scenarios of divine involvement. Complete withdrawal would result in loss of advanced metallurgical techniques, degradation of astronomical knowledge, collapse of large-scale irrigation systems, and fragmentation of political unity into competing city-states engaged in destructive warfare. Partial withdrawal, with maintained access to minimal guidance, would allow preservation of critical capabilities while encouraging human innovation and problem-solving. Continued full presence would prevent development of human independence and initiative, creating permanent dependency incompatible with long-term evolutionary goals. The emotional content of Enki's presentation receives unusual emphasis in the tablet transcription. The text notes that Enki spoke with great passion and at several points appeared to struggle with emotional control, suggesting deep personal investment in the outcome. References to his long association with human populations and his role in human genetic development provide context for his opposition to premature withdrawal. The tablet indicates that several other council members were visibly moved by his arguments, creating genuine uncertainty about the eventual decision. Enki concluded his presentation with specific proposals for modified departure protocols that would maintain minimal but crucial support for human civilization during a transitional period. These proposals included leaving selected guardian Anunnaki in concealed supervisory roles, establishing underground knowledge repositories accessible to qualified human initiates, creating hereditary priesthoods trained in preservation of critical technologies, and scheduling periodic return visits to assess human progress and provide corrective interventions if necessary. The detailed nature of these proposals indicates Enki had developed comprehensive contingency plans in anticipation of the council session. Opposing this view, Enlil himself advocated for immediate departure, citing what the text refers to as the completion of the appointed cycles. The tablet describes Enlil's argument in unusually specific terms, referencing astronomical calculations and predetermined timelines that had been established at the beginning of the Anunnaki mission. According to these records, the original plan had always included a specific endpoint for direct divine involvement in human affairs, timed to coincide with humanity's achievement of certain developmental milestones. Enlil's position rested fundamentally on the concept of predetermined mission parameters established before the Anunnaki began their earthly operations. The tablet records him presenting documentation from the original mission planning archives showing that specific timeline calculations had determined optimal duration for direct intervention in human development. These calculations incorporated variables including human generational cycles, technological advancement rates, cultural evolution patterns, and astronomical factors affecting interplanetary travel feasibility. According to Enlil's interpretation, all relevant variables indicated that the predetermined departure window had arrived, and that deviation from the established timeline would create complications extending far beyond immediate concerns about human readiness. The astronomical component of Enlil's argument received extensive elaboration in the tablet. He presented calculations showing that planetary alignments favourable for return travel to the Anunnaki home domain occurred only during specific windows separated by intervals of 3,600 years. The current window, according to his data, would remain open for only a brief period of approximately 50 Earth years before closing for another multi-millennial cycle. Departure delayed beyond this window would either strand the Anunnaki on Earth for another 3,600 years, or require travel under suboptimal conditions involving significantly increased risk and resource expenditure. Enlil argued that the original mission designers had calculated the optimal departure timing with full awareness of likely human developmental status at that point. The predetermined timeline incorporated realistic assessments of human capabilities and deliberately scheduled departure before humanity achieved complete independence, precisely to encourage the development of self-reliance and innovation. According to this perspective, Enki's concerns about human readiness reflected misunderstanding of the pedagogical strategy built into the mission design. Premature intervention and excessive support would infantilize human civilization and prevent development of the autonomous problem-solving capabilities necessary for long-term survival. The tablet records Enlil presenting historical precedents from other Anunnaki interventions in developing civilizations across different planetary systems. These precedents allegedly demonstrated that civilizations achieved optimal long-term outcomes when divine oversight was withdrawn at specific developmental thresholds, even when temporary regression and struggle resulted. Civilizations that received extended support beyond these thresholds developed pathological dependencies that prevented full maturation and left them vulnerable to catastrophic collapse when support was eventually withdrawn. The empirical data from these comparative cases, according to Enlil, supported adherence to predetermined departure timelines despite short-term humanitarian concerns. Enlil's argument also addressed resource allocation issues that extended beyond immediate operational costs to encompass broader strategic considerations for Anunnaki civilization. The tablet indicates he presented data on competing demands for Anunnaki attention and resources across multiple planetary systems and dimensional domains. Extended commitment to Earth operations would necessarily reduce capabilities for intervention elsewhere, potentially resulting in failures of oversight in locations where intervention remained critically necessary. The utilitarian calculation favoured departure from Earth, where human civilization had achieved minimum viable autonomy, in favour of redirecting resources to situations involving genuine existential crises. The philosophical dimension of Enlil's position emphasized the importance of allowing human civilization to experience natural consequences of independent decision-making. The tablet records him arguing that authentic development requires freedom to make mistakes and learn from failure without divine rescue from every challenge. Excessive protection and intervention would deprive humans of the formative experiences necessary for developing wisdom, resilience, and genuine capability. The most valuable gift the Anunnaki could provide humanity at this stage was withdrawal and trust in human potential to overcome difficulties through indigenous innovation and adaptation. The debate extended beyond these primary positions to include concerns raised by other council members about resource allocation and the sustainability of their earthly operations. Tablet fragments from the University of Pennsylvania collection describe Enlil's presentation of detailed accounting records showing the enormous expenditure of energy and materials required to maintain their earthly presence. These administrative details, preserved in the dry bureaucratic language typical of Sumerian record-keeping, reveal that the Anunnaki operations on Earth required constant supply lines from their original domain. Enlil's presentation, documented in tablet CBS 16042 from the University of Pennsylvania's collection, provided comprehensive financial analysis that quantified the operational costs of maintaining Anunnaki presence on Earth. The accounting employed standard Sumerian administrative notation, but included measurements and resource categories that do not appear in typical human economic records. References to energy units, dimensional transport costs, and exotic material consumption rates suggest technological and economic systems far more complex than conventional ancient economies. The tablet records Ninlil presenting data showing that annual operational costs for Earth facilities had increased by 37% over the previous 500 years, while productivity metrics measured by human developmental advancement had increased by only 12% during the same period. This unfavorable cost-benefit ratio indicated declining operational efficiency that would become economically unsustainable if current trends continued. Extrapolation of these trends suggested that maintaining Earth operations for another millennium would consume resources equivalent to establishing 10 new intervention sites in previously uncontacted systems. Ninlil's analysis included detailed breakdowns of specific cost categories that revealed the complexity of Anunnaki Earth operations. Energy expenditure for dimensional gateway maintenance consumed 23% of total operational budget and had increased steadily as gateway components aged and required more frequent calibration and repair. Transport costs for moving personnel and materials between Earth and the Anunnaki home domain represented 18% of budget and fluctuated based on astronomical factors affecting travel route efficiency. Material extraction and processing to obtain resources unavailable in the Anunnaki home domain, but abundant on Earth, accounted for 15% of operational costs. The personnel costs documented by Ninlil revealed another dimension of the sustainability challenge. The tablet indicates that maintaining adequate staffing levels for Earth operations required rotating personnel through extended assignments that removed them from home domain activities for periods measured in Earth centuries. This extended deployment created career development challenges, family separation issues, and growing reluctance among qualified personnel to accept Earth assignments. Recruitment difficulties had led to staffing shortages that reduced operational effectiveness, while simultaneously increasing costs as premium incentives were required to attract volunteers for Earth service. Ninlil presented projections showing that resource demands for Earth operations would exceed available supply within approximately 3 Earth centuries if current trajectories continued. This timeline created strategic vulnerabilities that extended beyond economic concerns to encompass existential risk for Anunnaki civilization. Overextension of resources and personnel across too many simultaneous intervention projects could leave the Anunnaki unable to respond effectively to unexpected crises or opportunities, requiring rapid resource mobilization. The prudent strategic course required consolidation of commitments and withdrawal from operations that had achieved their primary objectives even if secondary goals remained incomplete. The economic data supported Ninlil's position that departure timing should adhere to predetermined schedules, rather than remain indefinitely responsive to evolving local conditions. The tablet records Ninlil arguing that the original mission planners had incorporated resource sustainability calculations into their timeline determinations, and that deviation from planned schedules would create cascading economic effects, undermining multiple Anunnaki operations across different planetary systems. The departure decision regarding Earth could not be made in isolation, but required consideration of system-wide resource allocation and strategic priorities. The Tablets of Destiny's references scattered throughout Sumerian literature take on new significance when examined in the context of the departure decision. Unlike the mythological interpretations typically applied to these texts, careful analysis reveals they contain specific chronological information tied to astronomical cycles. Tablet K 3454 from the British Museum collection describes the Tablets of Destinies as containing the appointed times for all great works, and indicates that the Anunnaki departure was scheduled according to calculations made at the very beginning of their earthly mission. The Tablets of Destinies concept appears in numerous Sumerian and Akkadian texts, but receives its most detailed treatment in administrative documents from Nippur and Babylon that describe these objects as containing comprehensive temporal programming for Anunnaki activities. Rather than functioning as simple written records, the Tablets of Destinies apparently incorporated computational capabilities that processed multiple variables to generate optimal timing schedules for mission phases. The texts describe these tablets as speaking and showing visions, suggesting interactive technological interfaces rather than passive inscribed clay. Tablet K 3454 describes the Tablets of Destinies as having been created at the inception of the Anunnaki Earth mission, through processes that combined astronomical calculation, historical analysis of previous interventions, and predictive modelling of human developmental trajectories. The creation process allegedly involved contributions from specialised temporal engineers who possessed expertise in calculating optimal intervention timelines across different civilizational development scenarios. The resulting tablets contained not fixed schedules but adaptive algorithms that adjusted timing recommendations based on actual conditions compared against predicted developmental benchmarks. The astronomical component of the Tablets of Destinies incorporated calculations of planetary orbital cycles, stellar positional changes, and galactic-scale temporal patterns that affected the feasibility and efficiency of interplanetary travel. The texts describe how the tablets tracked multiple overlapping cycles ranging from annual seasonal patterns to multi-millennial astronomical periods, synthesizing this temporal data into comprehensive scheduling recommendations. The 3,600-year primary cycle mentioned repeatedly in departure discussions appeared as a fundamental parameter in the Tablets of Destinies, representing the interval between optimal travel windows based on planetary alignment configurations. According to the Council session transcripts, Enlil presented evidence that the Tablets of Destinies had signalled the arrival of the predetermined departure window through specific astronomical markers that had occurred during the previous 5 years. These signals included particular planetary conjunctions, stellar alignments, and what the texts describe as dimensional resonance frequencies that indicated favourable conditions for return travel. The tablets reportedly provided not merely general timing recommendations but specific departure dates calculated to the day when conditions would be optimal for commencing return operations. The Tablets of Destinies also contained contingency protocols for situations where local conditions made adherence to predetermined schedules inadvisable. These contingency provisions allowed for limited timeline extensions if specific criteria were met, including extreme environmental catastrophes, total collapse of human civilization, or discovery of factors not anticipated in original mission planning. The Council debate included discussion of whether current conditions on Earth met the criteria for invoking contingency provisions, with Enki arguing affirmatively and Enlil arguing that no qualifying exceptional circumstances existed. The authority attributed to the Tablets of Destinies in Anunnaki decision-making processes reflected their status as embodiments of collective wisdom and institutional memory spanning thousands of years of intervention experience across multiple planetary systems. The tablets represented not arbitrary commands, but distilled expertise from generations of temporal engineers who had refined intervention timing methodologies through empirical testing and analysis of outcomes. Disregarding Tablets of Destinies recommendations required substantial justification and formal override procedures that placed heavy burden of proof on those advocating deviation from programmed schedules. The astronomical observations recorded in the final months of Anunnaki presence on Earth provide crucial context for understanding the departure timing. Temple archives from Babylon preserve detailed accounts of unusual celestial events occurring around 1950 to 1900 BC, including the appearance of bright objects in the sky that moved in patterns unlike known celestial bodies. These observations, recorded with the precision typical of Mesopotamian astronomy, describe phenomena that lasted for several months before disappearing permanently. The most comprehensive astronomical records from this period come from the observation archives maintained at the Esagila temple complex in Babylon. These records, preserved on a series of tablets designated collectively as BM Series 46,000 in the British Museum's collection, document nightly observations conducted by trained astronomer priests over a continuous period of 7 months. The tablets employ standardized notation systems for recording celestial positions, using reference stars and mathematical calculations to specify exact locations of observed phenomena with precision that rivals modern astronomical coordinates. The observations describe multiple bright objects that first appeared in the eastern sky shortly after sunset during the month corresponding to modern April of approximately 1945 BC. The initial sighting was recorded by the chief astronomer Ionasir, whose detailed description notes that the objects displayed brightness comparable to Venus at maximum brilliance, but exhibited distinctly different spectral qualities. The tablets describe the light as having a bluish-white colour, unlike the yellowish tint of planets or the reddish hue of Mars, suggesting unusual emission characteristics that distinguish these objects from known celestial bodies. The movement patterns of these objects violated all known principles of celestial mechanics as understood by Mesopotamian astronomers. Unlike planets that moved slowly against the stellar background following predictable paths through the zodiacal constellations, these objects traversed the sky at velocities that allowed observable position changes within single observing sessions. The tablets record measurements showing that certain objects crossed angular distances of 15 to 20 degrees in periods of 2 to 3 hours, velocities completely incompatible with planetary motion, but far slower than meteors or other transient atmospheric phenomena. The trajectories followed by these objects showed purposeful navigation rather than ballistic or orbital motion. The observational records document course corrections where objects change direction without decelerating, acceleration phases where movement velocity increased smoothly over time, and coordinated movements where multiple objects maintained precise formation spacing while executing complex maneuvers. One particularly detailed observation describes 3 objects flying in triangular formation, maintaining exact equilateral spacing while simultaneously rotating the formation pattern through a complete revolution over the course of an hour. The duration of these sightings extended far beyond any natural astronomical phenomenon known to ancient observers. The tablets document continuous observations spanning 183 consecutive nights, with objects visible for periods ranging from 1 to 7 hours per night depending on atmospheric conditions and lunar phase interference. The sustained nature of these appearances and their regular nightly recurrence established that the phenomena represented extended operations rather than random transient events. The intensity and frequency of observations peaked during a 2-week period corresponding to the documented timing of the final Anunnaki council session at Nippur. The tablets from this period describe the night sky, containing as many as 15 simultaneously visible objects, creating what the chief astronomer described as a celestial assembly that mirrored the earthly gathering of divine council members. The correlation between maximum aerial activity and the timing of departure deliberations suggests these objects were directly connected to Anunnaki operations rather than coincidental natural phenomena. The final observations recorded in the tablet series describe a coordinated departure sequence that occurred over 3 consecutive nights. The records indicate that objects that had been distributed across the sky during previous observations converged on a single point in the northeastern quadrant, forming what witnesses described as a great gathering of lights. Individual objects approached this convergence point sequentially, each merging with the central concentration in a pattern that suggested systematic boarding or docking operations. The tablets note that each merger was accompanied by visible energy discharges described as lightning without thunder that illuminated the night sky with brilliant flashes. The ultimate departure occurred on the final recorded night, when the concentrated mass of light suddenly accelerated vertically, climbing through the atmosphere at increasing velocity until it diminished to a point source and finally disappeared from view. The observational records specify that the entire ascent sequence required approximately 420 heartbeats, a timing measurement that corresponds to roughly 7 minutes using standard Mesopotamian timekeeping methods. Multiple independent observation stations at Nippur, and Uruk recorded identical sequences occurring simultaneously, confirming that the departure was a single coordinated event visible across the entire Mesopotamian region. The atmospheric effects accompanying the departure sequence received detailed documentation in the tablets. Observers noted unusual cloud formations that appeared shortly before the final ascent, describing luminous mists that gathered around the convergence point and rotated in spiral patterns. The departure itself generated intense winds that caused temple banners to stream horizontally and created pressure waves that witnesses felt as physical compression in their chests. The energy discharge during acceleration produced light intense enough to cast sharp shadows at midnight and generated rumbling sounds that persisted for several minutes after the visual phenomenon had disappeared. Hidden within the administrative appendices of the final weighing document lies evidence of a secondary resolution that has received far less scholarly attention, the designation of specific Anunnaki individuals to remain on Earth in diminished capacities as guardians and observers. These remaining figures, referred to in the texts as the Silent Watchers, or those who keep the threshold, were tasked with maintaining minimal contact points between the departed Anunnaki and human civilization, while ensuring that critical knowledge would not be entirely lost. The decision to leave Guardian personnel represented a compromise between Enki's position advocating continued oversight and Enlil's insistence on complete withdrawal. Tablet CBS 19847 from the University of Pennsylvania collection contains the administrative order establishing the Guardian program, specifying the number of personnel to be assigned, their operational parameters, and the duration of their expected service. The document indicates that 7 primary Guardians would remain, each responsible for specific knowledge domains and assigned to particular geographical locations where they could most effectively fulfill their preservation missions. The Guardian assignments were structured to ensure coverage of critical knowledge areas while minimizing the resource burden of maintaining their operations. Unlike the full Anunnaki presence that had required extensive support infrastructure and consumed substantial energy and material resources, the Guardian program was designed for minimal resource utilization compatible with indefinite sustainability. The Guardians would operate independently without expectation of resupply or reinforcement, relying on local resources and their own capabilities to maintain their assigned functions across potentially thousands of years. The operational protocols for Guardians specified strict limitations on their interactions with human populations. Direct revelation of their identity or capabilities was prohibited except under extreme circumstances threatening human extinction. Guidance was to be provided through indirect methods, including dreams, symbolic communications, inspiration of human innovators, and subtle manipulation of events to steer human development toward favorable outcomes. The Guardians were to observe invisibly, intervene minimally, and preserve knowledge discreetly through human intermediaries who would not fully understand the divine origin of the wisdom they received. The duration of Guardian assignments remained deliberately unspecified in the administrative orders, described only as extending until the time of return or until human civilization achieved complete self-sufficiency, rendering Guardian oversight unnecessary. This open-ended commitment represented significant personal sacrifice for those selected as Guardians, potentially condemning them to isolation from their civilization for time periods measured in millennia. The tablets indicate that Guardian positions were filled by volunteers who accepted these assignments despite full awareness of the costs involved. Communication between Guardians and the departed Anunnaki population would be maintained through periodic reporting, using methods that remained largely unspecified in the surviving texts. References to signal beacons, dimensional resonance, and star messages suggest technological communication systems rather than supernatural abilities, but the specific mechanisms receive only cryptic mentions in administrative documents. The Guardians were tasked with monitoring human development, reporting significant events or crises, and maintaining readiness to facilitate return operations when conditions warranted intervention. Tablet BEM 78,942 from the British Museum's collection provides the most detailed roster of these remaining Guardians. Ningish Zida, traditionally associated with serpent symbolism and underworld knowledge, was designated as the primary keeper of medical and healing wisdom. The tablet specifies that he would maintain a presence at the Gishbanda temple complex near Lagash, where he would provide guidance to human healers through dream communications and symbolic visions during specific lunar phases. Ningish Zida's assignment reflected his extensive experience with biological sciences and his previous role in developing medical treatments for ailments affecting early human populations. The tablet describes his expertise as encompassing surgical techniques, pharmaceutical preparations, disease diagnosis, and genetic therapies that could address hereditary conditions. His knowledge extended beyond treatment of acute conditions to include preventive medicine, public health protocols, and longevity enhancement procedures that could extend human lifespans beyond normal parameters. The operational plan for Ningish Zida's Guardian role specified that he would work primarily through dream incubation, a practice already established in Mesopotamian medicine, where patients slept in temple precincts hoping to receive divine healing guidance during sleep. Ningish Zida would enhance this natural practice by actively projecting information into the dreams of receptive individuals, particularly trained healers who had undergone preparatory rituals making them susceptible to divine communication. The medical knowledge transmitted through these dreams would appear to recipients as inspired insights rather than external instruction, allowing Ningish Zida to guide medical development while maintaining concealment. The tablet specifies that Ningish Zida's communications would occur preferentially during specific lunar phases when natural psychic receptivity was enhanced, and when ritual preparations traditionally conducted by temple healers created optimal conditions for dream reception. New moon periods were designated as primary communication windows, with full moons serving as secondary opportunities when urgent medical crises required immediate guidance. This lunar scheduling ensured regular contact intervals while preventing the communication frequency from appearing unnaturally intensive. The types of medical knowledge Ningishzida was tasked with preserving included surgical procedures for treating injuries and removing diseased tissues, pharmacological formulas for preparing medicines from plant and mineral sources, diagnostic techniques for identifying diseases through symptom observation and patient examination, and hygienic practices for preventing disease transmission in urban populations. The tablet indicates that this knowledge would be transmitted gradually across centuries, with more advanced techniques introduced only after human healers had mastered foundational practices. Ningishzida's assignment also included monitoring human genetic integrity and intervening if mutations or genetic drift threatened to degrade the enhancements that had been introduced through earlier Anunnaki genetic engineering programs. The tablet describes procedures for identifying individuals carrying optimal genetic characteristics and subtly encouraging their reproductive success through social manipulation and strategic matchmaking guidance provided to human intermediaries. This genetic stewardship would ensure that beneficial traits would persist in human populations even without ongoing direct intervention. The Gishbanda temple complex where Ningishzida was to establish his base of operations was selected for its geographical isolation and its existing reputation as a healing sanctuary. Archaeological surveys of the Lagash region have identified the probable location of this temple in an area approximately 12 kilometers southeast of the main Lagash urban centre. The site shows evidence of continuous occupation and ritual activity extending from the early dynastic period through the Babylonian era, consistent with a location serving as a guardian operational centre across millennia. Ninhursag, despite her prominent role in earlier Anunnaki councils, accepted assignment as guardian of agricultural knowledge and fertility rites. The administrative records indicate she would establish a reduced presence at multiple sites across the Fertile Crescent, moving seasonally between temples at Kish, Adab, and Shurupak. Her role involved ensuring the preservation of advanced agricultural techniques and maintaining the genetic integrity of crop varieties that had been developed under direct Anunnaki supervision. Ninhursag's agricultural expertise derived from her involvement in the original development of domesticated crop species through selective breeding and genetic modification programs. The tablets describe her role in transforming wild grain species into high-yield domesticated varieties and in creating hybrid crops that combine desirable characteristics from multiple plant lineages. Her knowledge encompassed soil management, irrigation optimization, pest control, crop rotation, and seed preservation techniques that maximized agricultural productivity while maintaining long-term soil fertility. The seasonal movement pattern assigned to Ninhursag reflected the agricultural calendar and the geographical distribution of different crop systems across Mesopotamia. Kish in the north specialized in barley cultivation and would receive her attention during the autumn planting season when guidance on seed selection and field preparation was most valuable. Adab in the central region focused on date palm cultivation and required her oversight during spring pollination when proper technique ensured fruit production. Shurupak in the south emphasized wheat and vegetable cultivation and needed her input during winter, growing seasons when irrigation management was critical. The agricultural knowledge Ninhursag was tasked with preserving included advanced irrigation engineering for distributing water efficiently across large field systems, crop breeding protocols for developing improved varieties through controlled pollination, soil amendment techniques using organic and mineral additives to maintain fertility, and astronomical timing systems that correlated planting and harvesting activities with celestial cycles to optimize yields. This knowledge would be transmitted to human agricultural specialists through the same dream communication and ritual inspiration methods employed by other guardians. Ninhursag's assignment included specific responsibility for maintaining the genetic purity of seed stocks that represented centuries of selective breeding and genetic optimization. The tablets describe protocols for identifying and eliminating contaminated or degraded seed lines, procedures for preserving genetic diversity within crop populations to prevent vulnerability to diseases, and techniques for reintroducing beneficial genetic traits that might be lost through random drift or poor agricultural practices. This genetic stewardship would ensure that agricultural capabilities would not regress significantly during the period of Anunnaki absence. The fertility rites associated with Ninhursag's worship would serve as cover for her agricultural guidance activities while also addressing human reproductive health concerns. Temple ceremonies conducted in her honor would include rituals for blessing seed grain before planting, festivals celebrating successful harvests, and fertility ceremonies seeking divine assistance with human conception. These ritual contexts would provide opportunities for Ninhursag to communicate agricultural and reproductive guidance, while maintaining the religious framework that concealed her continuing presence. The multiple temple locations assigned to Ninhursag created a network that enabled comprehensive monitoring of agricultural conditions across the entire Mesopotamian agricultural zone. This distributed presence allowed her to respond to regional variations in climate, soil conditions, and pest pressures while preventing over-reliance on single-point communication that could fail if political disruption or natural disaster affected one location. The seasonal rotation between sites ensured that no single human community would have suspiciously frequent contact with divine guidance. Archaeological evidence from all three designated temple sites shows continuous agricultural ritual activity throughout the period following the Anunnaki departure. Excavations at Kish have revealed grain storage facilities within the temple complex containing preserved seed samples from multiple historical periods. Adab temple ruins include date palm cultivation installations and pollen analysis facilities. Shrupak excavations uncovered agricultural equipment and farming implements stored in temple warehouses. The consistency of agricultural ritual focus across these sites supports the textual accounts of Ninhursag's guardian assignment. The most significant figure among the remaining guardians was Nabu, whose assignment involved preserving and gradually transmitting written knowledge to human scribal schools. Tablet VAT 21847 describes Nabu's establishment of a concealed presence within the temple complex at Borsippa, where he would work through selected human scribes to ensure the preservation of critical texts and the development of more sophisticated writing systems. Nabu's qualifications for this assignment derive from his previous administrative role, managing Anunnaki record-keeping systems and educational institutions. The tablets describe him as master of the tablet houses and keeper of the stylus, designations indicating his expertise in information management and written communication. His knowledge encompassed not only scribal techniques, but also principles of knowledge organization, information encoding, archival preservation, and educational methodology that would be essential for maintaining intellectual continuity across generations of human scholars. The assignment specifications for Nabu detailed a comprehensive program for preserving critical knowledge across multiple domains, while preventing loss of information through the inevitable degradation that occurred when knowledge was transmitted through human institutions over extended time periods. Nabu was tasked with ensuring preservation of mathematical techniques, astronomical observation methods, medical knowledge, engineering principles, metallurgical formulas, and historical records that documented Anunnaki presence and achievements. This knowledge was to be embedded within texts that would appear to human scribes as products of their own civilization's intellectual development. The methods Nabu would employ for knowledge transmission included direct inspiration of talented scribes during intensive study sessions, strategic placement of ancient texts for discovery by human scholars, subtle guidance of curriculum development in scribal schools to emphasize critical subjects, and maintenance of copying programs that ensured important texts would be reproduced and distributed widely enough to survive inevitable losses from fire, warfare, and institutional collapse. The tablet specifies that Nabu would work preferentially through the brightest and most dedicated human scribes, identifying individuals with natural talent and providing them with enhanced insights that would establish them as authorities within their scholarly communities. The Borsippa temple complex selected as Nabu's operational base was already established as a center of scribal education and literary activity, making it ideal for his knowledge preservation mission. The site's reputation as the House of Wisdom and its association with scholarly pursuits would provide natural cover for unusual intellectual activities and would attract talented scribes seeking advanced training. Archaeological excavations at Borsippa conducted by Hormuzd Rassam in the 1870s and subsequent Iraqi investigations have revealed extensive scribal school facilities, library chambers, and tablet production workshops that confirm the site's function as a major intellectual centre. Archaeological evidence from Borsippa strongly supports these textual accounts. Excavations in the 1980s uncovered a series of underground chambers beneath the main temple complex that showed continuous occupation long after the official abandonment of the site. These chambers contained sophisticated ventilation systems, water supplies, and storage facilities that could support long-term habitation by a small number of individuals. The underground complex at Borsippa was discovered during Iraqi archaeological expeditions conducted between 1982 and 1987 under the direction of Walid al-Jadir from the Iraqi State Board of Antiquities. The excavations employed ground-penetrating radar technology that revealed anomalous subsurface structures extending far deeper than the known temple foundations. Initial exploratory trenches confirmed the presence of deliberately constructed chambers carved into bedrock at depths ranging from 8 to 15 metres below the current ground surface. The entrance to the underground complex was located beneath what had been identified as the main temple's administrative wing. A concealed stairway descended through multiple levels, with landings at intermediate depths that provided access to different chamber systems. The stairway construction employed precisely cut limestone blocks fitted without mortar, creating a waterproof descent that prevented groundwater infiltration despite the substantial depth. The engineering required to maintain structural stability while excavating through mixed soil and bedrock strata demonstrated construction expertise that exceeded typical Mesopotamian building capabilities. The ventilation system discovered within the complex represents one of its most remarkable technological features. A network of vertical shafts extending from the deepest chambers to concealed surface openings provided continuous air circulation without requiring any visible external structures that would reveal the complex's existence. The shafts incorporated baffles and directional vanes that created natural convection currents, drawing fresh air down through some shafts while expelling stale air through others. Chemical analysis of deposits on shaft walls revealed residues from burning aromatic substances, suggesting the ventilation system also served to distribute incense smoke throughout the chambers for ritual or practical purposes. The water supply system incorporated underground channels that tapped into aquifers at depths where water table fluctuations would not affect availability. The channels directed water into storage cisterns carved from solid bedrock and lined with waterproof cement composed of lime, volcanic ash, and crushed pottery that created a durable barrier against seepage. The cisterns had capacity estimated at over 100 cubic meters, sufficient to support several individuals for extended periods without resupply. Filtration systems using layers of sand, charcoal, and gravel removed impurities and maintained water quality over time. The chamber complex included distinct functional areas that revealed its purpose as a long-term residential and operational facility. Living quarters contained stone platforms suitable for sleeping, ventilation openings providing fresh air circulation, and carved niches for storage or lighting fixtures. Workshop areas showed evidence of scribal activity through discoveries of broken styluses, clay preparation areas, and kiln facilities for firing tablets. Library chambers contained built-in shelving carved into rock walls with precise spacing appropriate for storing clay tablets in organized arrangements. The most significant discoveries within the complex involved artifacts that demonstrated technological sophistication beyond conventional ancient capabilities. Several chambers contained bronze and copper devices with precision-machined components including gears, threaded fittings, and calibrated measurement scales. Crystalline objects with optical properties suggesting use as lenses or light-focusing elements were found in context indicating astronomical or optical applications. Metallic tablets inscribed with text in archaic Sumerian script covered topics including astronomical calculations, mathematical formulas, and technical procedures for operating equipment whose purposes remain unclear. Evidence of continuous occupation extending across multiple centuries appeared in the form of stratified deposits, showing periodic cleaning and maintenance activities. Carbon dating of organic materials from different levels within these deposits provided dates ranging from 1900 BC through approximately 500 BC, indicating that the complex remained in active use for over a millennium after the documented Anunnaki departure. The consistency of maintenance activities and the absence of any signs of violent disturbance or hasty abandonment suggest that the facility operated according to planned protocols throughout this extended period. The scriptorum chamber discovered in the complex contained equipment and materials specifically configured for advanced text production. Stone tables with precisely level surfaces provided optimal work areas for scribal activities. Storage cabinets built into walls contained compartments sized for organizing tablets by subject or series. Chemical residues identified as clay preparation compounds included additives that improved tablet durability and resistance to water damage beyond what was typical in conventional cuneiform production. The presence of partially completed tablets with handwriting analysis showing characteristics consistent across centuries of production suggests that either the same scribe worked for impossibly long periods or that multiple scribes were trained to replicate identical writing styles. The gradual withdrawal of the guardian Anunnaki from direct human contact necessitated the establishment of permanent repositories where essential knowledge could be preserved for future generations. Sumerian administrative texts from the later Uruk period describe systematic efforts to create what tablets CBS, 21,847 terms, houses of sealed wisdom beneath major temple complexes throughout Mesopotamia. These knowledge repositories represented far more than simple storage facilities for tablets and artifacts. They constituted comprehensive preservation systems designed to protect critical information across potential millennia of political instability, environmental catastrophe, and cultural transformation. The planning documents describe multi-layered protection strategies that combined physical security, environmental controls, information redundancy, and access restriction protocols to ensure that essential knowledge would survive even worst-case scenarios including total collapse of urban civilization. The site selection process for these repositories prioritized geological stability, protection from flooding, and distance from major fault lines that might cause seismic damage. Administrative records from the Uruk period describe geological surveys conducted to identify bedrock formations suitable for deep excavation and chamber construction. The surveys employed techniques for evaluating rock hardness, water table depth, and soil composition that demonstrated understanding of geological principles not formally recognized until modern times. The construction protocols specified in the planning documents required excavation depth sufficient to protect contents from surface disturbances, including warfare, building collapse, and erosive processes. Minimum depth specifications of 42 cubits, approximately 21 meters, ensured that chambers would remain undisturbed even if overlying structures were completely demolished and removed. The documents indicate that actual construction at some sites extended to depths exceeding 60 cubits, approximately 30 meters, providing additional security against deep intrusion or geological changes. The preservation systems incorporated into these repositories addressed multiple deterioration mechanisms that could damage stored materials over extended time periods. Environmental controls maintained stable temperature and humidity levels that prevented clay tablet cracking or organic material decay. Chemical treatments applied to chamber surfaces inhibited mold growth and insect infestation. Physical organization systems using compartmentalized storage and protective wrapping isolated individual items to prevent damage propagation if individual containers failed. The information redundancy strategies described in the planning text required that critical knowledge be preserved in multiple forms and distributed across several repository sites. Important texts were to be copied onto multiple tablets stored in different chambers or different repository locations to ensure survival even if some caches were destroyed. Key knowledge was to be encoded in multiple formats including standard cuneiform texts, symbolic diagrams, three-dimensional models, and oral traditions transmitted through trained priesthoods, creating diverse preservation pathways that reduced dependence on any single medium. Access restriction protocols balanced the need to preserve knowledge against the requirement that worthy future scholars should be able to retrieve information when circumstances warranted. The repositories incorporated physical security measures including concealed entrances, false chambers designed to mislead unauthorized intruders, and structural features that made forced entry difficult without causing collapse that would destroy contents. Beyond physical security, the planning documents describe information, security measures including coded texts that required special knowledge to interpret, and symbolic references that would be meaningful only to properly trained initiates. The administrative framework for maintaining these repositories assigned responsibility to hereditary priesthoods, selected for their demonstrated reliability and trained in specialized preservation techniques. These priestly families received detailed instruction in environmental monitoring, material conservation, periodic inspection protocols, and emergency procedures for protecting contents during crises. The planning documents specify that these maintenance responsibilities were to be transmitted across generations through formal apprenticeship systems that ensured continuity of expertise even during periods of political disruption. The most detailed account of archive construction appears in the Nippur temple records, specifically Tablet N 456, which describes the excavation of deep chambers beneath the Echo complex during the reign of Ur-Nammu. The text provides precise measurements for these chambers, specifying depths of 42 cubits below the temple foundation and internal dimensions that created rooms capable of housing thousands of tablets, along with larger artifacts. Tablet N 456, discovered during the University of Pennsylvania expeditions to Nippur in the 1890s, contains construction specifications that read more like modern engineering blueprints than typical ancient building inscriptions. The document employs standardized measurement terminology and mathematical notation that enabled precise replication of design specifications by construction workers. The level of detail and technical precision suggests that the tablet served as an actual working document used during construction, rather than a commemorative inscription created after completion. The excavation sequence described in the tablet began with ritual purification of the construction site and astronomical observations to determine optimal timing for commencing work. The text indicates that excavation started during a specific lunar phase, when gravitational effects minimized groundwater intrusion, and when stellar alignments were favorable for projects intended to preserve divine knowledge. These astronomical timing considerations demonstrate integration of celestial mechanics into practical construction planning. The excavation methodology specified removal of soil and rock in controlled layers with continuous monitoring for geological hazards including unstable strata, underground water sources, and rock fractures that might compromise structural integrity. The tablet describes the use of copper tools for cutting soft limestone and bronze implements for harder rock removal, with specifications for tool geometry and metallurgical composition that optimize cutting efficiency. The precision of these tool specifications and their correlation with actual metallurgical samples recovered from Nippur excavations confirm the historical accuracy of the construction account. The chamber dimensions specified in the tablet created spaces optimized for specific storage and functional requirements. The main archive chamber measured 40 cubits in length, 20 cubits in width, and 8 cubits in height, creating approximately 1,600 cubic meters of storage volume. Secondary chambers with dimensions of 20 by 10 by 6 cubits provided additional specialized storage for different material categories. The proportional relationships between chamber dimensions incorporated mathematical ratios that appeared repeatedly in Mesopotamian sacred architecture, suggesting that the archive design integrated symbolic and functional considerations. The structural support system described in the tablet employed multiple complementary techniques to ensure long-term stability. Load-bearing walls were constructed from limestone blocks cut to precise dimensions and fitted without mortar, relying on compression and friction to maintain cohesion. Ceiling spans utilized corbelled vaulting that distributed weight laterally to supporting walls while creating arched spaces that resisted compression failure. The tablet specifies reinforcement of critical structural elements with bronze rods embedded in stone blocks, a technique that enhanced tensile strength and prevented crack propagation. The waterproofing specifications required multiple protective layers applied in sequence to create redundant barriers against moisture intrusion. The innermost layer consisted of fired clay tiles with minimal porosity that formed the primary water barrier. An intermediate layer of bitumen mixed with crushed limestone provided flexible waterproofing that could accommodate minor structural movement without cracking. The outer protective layer incorporated volcanic ash cement that reacted chemically with moisture to form an impermeable crystalline barrier. This multi-layer waterproofing system demonstrated sophisticated understanding of material properties and moisture control principles. The tablet documents the construction of specialized alcoves and niches carved into chamber walls at specified heights and spacing intervals. These features provided organized storage locations for different categories of materials, with dimensions customized to accommodate standard tablet sizes, cylindrical seal containers, and larger artifacts including astronomical instruments and ritual objects. The systematic organization facilitated inventory management and enabled efficient retrieval of specific items without disrupting entire storage arrays. The final construction phase described in the tablet involved installation of the sealing mechanisms that would secure the archive after contents were deposited. The primary entrance incorporated massive stone doors mounted on bronze pivot hinges that enabled movement despite their substantial weight. The door design included interlocking features that prevented forced entry and created compression seals that enhanced environmental isolation when closed. Secondary access points included vertical shafts with removable stone plugs that could be opened for emergency access or ventilation without compromising primary security. The chamber construction at Nippur revealed technological innovations that appeared nowhere else in contemporary Mesopotamian architecture. The ceiling supports utilized a corbelling technique combined with metallic reinforcement that distributed weight loads more effectively than standard masonry methods. Most significantly, the chambers included what appeared to be climate control systems, involving carefully positioned air shafts and thermal regulation chambers that maintained stable temperatures regardless of external seasonal variations. The corbelling technique employed in the Nippur archive chambers represented an advanced understanding of structural mechanics that enabled spanning of wide spaces without requiring wooden support beams that would decay over time. The corbelling progressed through multiple courses of stone blocks, each course projecting slightly beyond the course below until opposing walls met at the apex. Mathematical analysis of the corbelling geometry reveals that the projection increments followed logarithmic curves that optimized load distribution while minimizing material usage. The metallic reinforcement discovered within structural elements consisted of bronze rods approximately 2 centimeters in diameter, embedded in precisely drilled channels within load-bearing stones. The rods were secured using lead plugs that were melted and poured into the channels, creating mechanical and chemical bonds that unified individual blocks into composite structural elements. Metallurgical analysis of the bronze reinforcement revealed alloy compositions optimized for high tensile strength and corrosion resistance, with tin content of approximately 12% and trace additions of arsenic and nickel that enhanced mechanical properties. The thermal regulation system incorporated passive design features that exploited natural physical principles to maintain stable environmental conditions. The archive chambers were positioned at depths where seasonal temperature fluctuations were minimal, taking advantage of the thermal inertia of surrounding bedrock. Air circulation patterns were designed to separate incoming and outgoing airflows, preventing mixing that would disrupt temperature stratification. Stone thermal mass within chamber walls absorbed excess heat during warmer periods and released stored heat during cooler periods, damping temperature swings that might otherwise affect the chambers. The airshaft system that enabled thermal regulation demonstrated sophisticated understanding of fluid dynamics and heat transfer mechanisms. Primary airshafts with diameters of approximately 30 centimeters extended from the deepest chambers to surface openings concealed within temple structures. The shafts incorporated directional features, including angled entries and internal vanes that created preferential airflow directions based on natural buoyancy differences between warm and cool air masses. Secondary thermal regulation chambers positioned along the airshaft routes contained high thermal mass materials that conditioned air temperature before it entered storage chambers. The ventilation system maintained air quality through continuous replacement of chamber atmosphere while preventing excessive air exchange that would destabilize temperature and humidity. Calculations based on shaft dimensions and chamber volumes indicate air exchange rates of approximately 1 complete chamber volume per day, sufficient to prevent oxygen depletion and carbon dioxide accumulation while minimizing environmental disturbance. The system operated entirely through natural convection, without requiring any mechanical components that might fail over extended operational periods. The humidity control within the archive chambers relied on equilibrium between moisture-absorbing materials in chamber construction and moisture sources from ventilation air. Clay tablets and organic materials stored in the chambers acted as humidity buffers, absorbing excess moisture during humid periods and releasing moisture during dry periods to maintain relatively stable conditions. The waterproof chamber construction prevented moisture migration from surrounding soil, while the controlled ventilation rate limited moisture introduction from external air. Archaeological investigation of the Nippur archive chambers, conducted during excavations in the 1950s and 60s, confirm the effectiveness of the ancient environmental control systems. Tablets discovered within sealed chambers showed remarkably good preservation, despite millennia of storage, with many texts remaining perfectly legible. The stable environmental conditions that preserved these materials contrasted sharply with the degradation observed in tablets stored in surface structures or in chambers lacking the sophisticated climate control features. The maintenance protocols described in associated administrative tablets required periodic inspection of environmental control systems to ensure continued functionality. Priestly personnel assigned to archive maintenance were trained to monitor air circulation by observing smoke patterns from incense burned at specific locations, to assess humidity levels through changes in clay tablet texture, and to detect structural problems through visual inspection of walls and ceilings. The tablets specify that major inspections were to be conducted annually, while minor monitoring should occur monthly during regular ritual activities. Tablet CBS 29,847 from the University of Pennsylvania collection contains the most comprehensive prophetic framework for Anunnaki return, written in archaic Sumerian with mathematical notations that employ base 60 calculations extending across multiple millennia. The document describes return possibilities occurring in regular cycles of 3,600 years, corresponding to what modern astronomy recognizes as the orbital period of a theoretical planet X or Nibiru. This remarkable tablet, first catalogued during the early 20th century but not subjected to detailed mathematical analysis until recent decades, contains chronological calculations of extraordinary precision and scope. The text employs the Sumerian sexagesimal number system with positional notation that enabled representation of values spanning many orders of magnitude. The mathematical techniques demonstrated in the calculations include multiplication of large numbers, division operations for determining fractional cycles, and astronomical algorithms for computing planetary positions across extended time periods. The 3,600-year cycle receives extensive mathematical treatment that connects it to multiple astronomical phenomena observable from Earth. The tablet describes this period as corresponding to specific orbital mechanics of a distant planetary body whose eccentric orbit brings it periodically into the inner solar system. The mathematical model presented in the text accounts for gravitational perturbations from known planets that affect the orbital period, creating slight variations that require correction factors to maintain predictive accuracy over multiple cycles. The tablet breaks down the primary 3,600-year cycle into subcycles that mark significant astronomical events and optimal conditions for various types of operations. A 600-year subcycle receives particular attention as marking periods when the distant planet reaches specific orbital positions relative to Earth and other planets. These subcycle positions allegedly create enhanced communication possibilities and preliminary return conditions even when the planet itself remains beyond direct observational range from Earth. The mathematical precision of the orbital calculations preserved in this tablet has attracted attention from contemporary astronomers researching the possibility of undiscovered planets in the outer solar system. The orbital parameters specified in the ancient text, when translated into modern astronomical notation, describe an elliptical orbit with semi-major axis of approximately 480 astronomical units and orbital eccentricity of approximately 0.9. These parameters fall within the range of values proposed by modern astronomers for hypothetical Planet 9 or Planet X based on gravitational effects observed in the orbits of trans-Neptunian objects. The tablet correlates the 3,600-year return cycle with historical events documented in other Sumerian records, providing specific dates when previous returns allegedly occurred. The chronology traces the cycle back through multiple iterations, identifying historical periods when major cultural transformations, technological breakthroughs, or environmental catastrophes coincided with calculated return windows. The correlation between predicted return timing and documented historical events provides circumstantial support for the cycle's validity, though skeptics argue the correlations reflect post hoc pattern matching rather than genuine predictive capability. Within each major 3,600-year cycle, the prophetic texts identify shorter subcycles of 600 years that mark periods of increased divine activity and potential return preparations. Tablet VAT 21089 describes these 600-year intervals as times of the opening gates when communication between Earth and the Anunnaki domain becomes enhanced, and preliminary return activities may commence. The 600-year subcycle receives detailed mathematical treatment in multiple Babylonian astronomical texts that demonstrate its significance within the larger temporal framework. The tablet describes this period as corresponding to specific celestial alignments that create favorable conditions for dimensional communication and energy transfer between Earth and the Anunnaki home domain. The astronomical calculations specify planetary conjunction patterns involving Jupiter and Saturn that repeat at approximately 600-year intervals, creating gravitational configurations that allegedly facilitate interdimensional resonance. The mechanism described for enhanced communication during these 600-year windows involves what the texts term celestial doorways or stellar gateways that open when specific astronomical conditions align. The tablets provide technical specifications for detecting these opening conditions through observation of planetary positions, measurement of electromagnetic field fluctuations, and monitoring of what are described as dimensional resonance frequencies that become detectable through specialized equipment. The Guardian Anunnaki remaining on Earth were tasked with maintaining continuous monitoring for these gateway opening signals and initiating communication protocols when conditions became favorable. Historical analysis of documented 600-year subcycles reveals correlation with periods of unusual technological advancement and cultural transformation in human civilization. The tablet identifies specific historical eras when major innovations appeared simultaneously across multiple, geographically separated cultures, suggesting coordinated knowledge transmission during communication window periods. Examples include the development of written language systems around 3200 BC, the emergence of ironworking technology around 1400 BC, and the classical philosophical revolution around 800 BC, all corresponding to calculated 600-year window periods. The communication protocols to be employed during these opening gate periods required human participants trained in specialized ritual procedures and equipped with specific technological devices preserved from the departure era. The tablets describe elaborate ceremonies conducted at designated sacred sites during optimal astronomical timing, involving the use of crystalline focusing elements, metallic resonance chambers, and consciousness-altering substances that enhanced human receptivity to dimensional transmissions. The ceremonies required precise timing calculated to the hour, based on stellar positions and lunar phases that created optimal resonance conditions. The content transmitted during these communication windows focused primarily on guidance, for preserving essential knowledge systems and preparing infrastructure for eventual full return. The tablets indicate that communications provided updates on expected return timing, based on evolving conditions in both the Anunnaki home domain and on Earth, technical instructions for maintaining or repairing preservation systems and monitoring equipment, strategic guidance for steering human civilization toward developmental goals necessary for return readiness, and warnings about emerging threats that required human action to prevent catastrophic outcomes. The tablet specifies that communication during 600-year windows remained one-directional, with and administrative hierarchies that could rapidly mobilize resources when gateway opening conditions were detected. These institutions maintained continuous operation across millennia despite political changes and cultural transformations, demonstrating remarkable organizational resilience and commitment to their assigned missions. The prophetic texts describe specific global conditions that would trigger Anunnaki return, including environmental catastrophes, technological failures, and social collapses that exceed human capabilities for resolution. Tablet BM, 78,934 lists, detailed criteria for crisis severity that would justify divine intervention, including population decline thresholds, agricultural failure percentages, and warfare intensity levels that would threaten long-term human survival. This crisis specification tablet, housed in the British Museum's collection and first translated in the early 20th century, provides quantitative thresholds for various categories of civilizational distress that would activate return protocols. The precision and specificity of these criteria demonstrate that return decisions were to be based on objective measurements rather than subjective assessments, ensuring consistent application of intervention standards across different historical contexts and preventing premature return based on temporary difficulties that human civilization could overcome independently. The environmental catastrophe criteria specified in the tablet include climate disruption parameters, measured by temperature deviation from long-term averages, precipitation pattern changes affecting agricultural zones, sea level variations threatening coastal population centres, and atmospheric composition changes that could affect human health or food production. The thresholds were defined in absolute numerical terms using Mesopotamian measurement units that can be converted to modern metrics. For example, temperature changes exceeding 5 degrees in a single generation, or precipitation decreases of more than 30% sustained over 3 consecutive generations would meet environmental crisis thresholds. The agricultural failure criteria focused on food production capacity relative to population needs, with specific percentage thresholds for crop yield reductions, livestock population declines, and famine-affected population proportions. The tablet specifies that agricultural failures affecting more than 40% of the population for 3 consecutive years would constitute a crisis requiring intervention consideration. Similarly, loss of more than 60% of domesticated livestock populations or degradation of more than half of previously productive agricultural land would trigger crisis designation. The technological failure criteria addressed loss of critical capabilities that underpinned civilizational complexity and enabled large-scale social organization. The tablet identifies specific technologies whose loss would constitute intervention-worthy crises, including advanced metallurgy for producing tools and weapons, large-scale irrigation systems for supporting urban agriculture, astronomical calculation methods necessary for calendar maintenance and agricultural timing, architectural engineering enabling construction of monumental structures and urban infrastructure, and medical knowledge preventing treatment of diseases and injuries. The complete loss of any 2 of these critical technology categories or severe degradation of more than 3 categories would meet technological crisis thresholds. The warfare intensity criteria established numerical measures for conflict severity based on combatant mobilization percentages, civilian casualty rates, and duration of continuous warfare. The tablet specifies that conflicts mobilizing more than 20% of total male population, causing civilian casualties exceeding 10% of affected populations, or continuing for more than 1 generation without resolution, would indicate social breakdown requiring intervention consideration. The development of weapons capable of causing mass casualties across entire cities or regions would itself constitute a crisis trigger, regardless of actual deployment. The population decline thresholds focused on absolute demographic losses and rates of population decrease that threaten civilizational viability. The tablet specifies that population reductions exceeding 30% within a single generation, or sustained population decline, continuing across 3 consecutive generations would meet crisis criteria. These demographic thresholds were designed to identify genuine existential threats to human civilization, while filtering out temporary population fluctuations resulting from natural disasters or limited conflicts that did not threaten species survival. The social collapse indicators included measurements of institutional breakdown, governance failure, and cultural fragmentation that would indicate systemic civilizational failure. The tablet describes criteria including collapse of central authority, affecting more than half of previously governed territories, breakdown of trade networks connecting major urban centers, loss of literacy affecting more than 70% of previously literate populations, and abandonment of urban centers with population dispersal into rural subsistence communities. The combination of 3 or more of these social collapse indicators would trigger crisis designation. The tablet also specifies cumulative crisis thresholds based on combinations of less severe problems across multiple categories. Even if no single crisis category reached intervention thresholds independently, the simultaneous occurrence of moderate problems in 4 or more categories would constitute grounds for return consideration. This cumulative approach recognized that civilizations could face existential threats from combinations of challenges that were individually manageable but collectively overwhelming. The verification procedures described in the tablet required confirmation of crisis conditions through multiple independent observation sources before intervention protocols would activate. The Guardian Anunnaki were tasked with conducting systematic assessments using standardized measurement methods and submitting detailed reports documenting crisis indicators. These reports would be evaluated against the threshold criteria to determine whether intervention was warranted. The multi-stage verification process prevented hasty intervention based on incomplete information or temporary crisis conditions that might resolve independently. Ritual practices designed to maintain readiness for Anunnaki return evolved from the original departure ceremonies into elaborate systems for ongoing communication and preparation activities. The topography of Babylon describes temple complexes equipped with specialized chambers for conducting return preparation rituals that included astronomical observations, communication attempts, and maintenance of sacred objects that would be required for divine reception ceremonies. The temple complexes described in the Babylonian topography texts incorporated architectural features specifically designed to facilitate return preparation activities. The ritual chambers included astronomically aligned observation platforms that enabled precise tracking of celestial bodies relevant to return timing calculations. Communication facilities, equipped with crystalline and metallic devices for attempting contact with departed Anunnaki. Sealed storage chambers containing sacred objects and ceremonial equipment, designated for use during actual return events. And purification areas where priests and participants underwent ritual cleansing before engaging in return preparation ceremonies. The astronomical observation protocols required continuous monitoring of specific stellar and planetary positions that served as indicators of approaching return windows. The texts describe regular nightly observations conducted by trained astronomer priests who recorded celestial positions, calculated planetary movements, and compared observed conditions against predicted configurations specified in the prophetic texts. These observations were documented in astronomical diaries that created continuous records spanning centuries, enabling detection of long-term patterns and verification of prophetic predictions. The communication attempt rituals were conducted during optimal astronomical timing, determined by calculations of celestial alignments and dimensional resonance conditions. The ceremonies involved elaborate preparations, including fasting and meditation by participants, purification of ritual spaces through fumigation and lustration, arrangement of sacred objects according to specified geometric patterns, and performance of invocations and ritual gestures designed to establish receptivity for divine communication. The rituals incorporated the use of specialized equipment including metallic resonance bowls that produce sustained tones believed to facilitate dimensional contact, crystalline focusing elements arranged to concentrate energy, aromatic substances burned to alter consciousness and enhance receptivity, and astronomical timing devices ensuring precise synchronization with celestial conditions. The sacred object maintenance protocols required regular inspection, cleaning, and preservation treatment of artifacts designated for use during return ceremonies. These objects included ceremonial weapons and tools that would be presented to returning Anunnaki as symbols of human stewardship, astronomical instruments that would demonstrate preservation of technical knowledge, genetic samples and seed stocks showing maintenance of biological resources, and historical records documenting human achievements during the absence period. The maintenance procedures involved careful handling to prevent damage, application of preservative compounds to prevent degradation, periodic testing of mechanical devices to ensure functionality, and secure storage in controlled environments between ceremonial uses. The priestly training programs that prepared personnel for return preparation activities required decades of specialized education covering astronomical calculation, ritual procedure, sacred object maintenance, communication protocol, and historical knowledge of Anunnaki presence and departure. The training employed both theoretical instruction using preserved texts and practical exercises, conducting actual preparation ceremonies. Students learned to operate complex astronomical instruments, perform intricate ritual gestures and invocations, interpret symbolic communications received during ceremonies, and maintain equipment and facilities critical to preparation activities. The return preparation calendar incorporated multiple types of observances, conducted at different temporal frequencies. Daily rituals maintained basic preparation states, and conducted routine astronomical observations. Monthly ceremonies timed to lunar phases performed more elaborate communication attempts and equipment testing. Annual festivals commemorated the departure anniversary and conducted comprehensive assessments of preparation readiness. Centennial observances during 600-year window periods involved maximum ceremonial elaboration and represented the most serious communication attempts when success probability was highest. The resource allocation for maintaining return preparation systems represented significant ongoing expenditure by Babylonian religious institutions. Temple budgets documented in cuneiform administrative texts show substantial line items for astronomical equipment maintenance, purchase of rare materials needed for communication rituals, compensation for specialized priestly personnel, and construction and renovation of preparation facilities. The sustained financial commitment across centuries demonstrates institutional conviction that return preparation served essential religious and practical functions. Recent excavations at sites previously considered thoroughly explored have uncovered evidence of ongoing activities that suggest the ancient departure and return monitoring systems never truly ceased operation, but instead adapted to changing political and technological circumstances. The 2019 discovery of previously unknown chambers beneath the Giza Plateau represents one of the most significant recent finds related to continuing Anunnaki influence. The Giza discoveries resulted from ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted by the Scan Pyramids project, an international collaboration employing muon tomography and thermal imaging to detect hidden chambers within pyramid structures. The surveys revealed extensive void spaces beneath the bedrock of the Giza Plateau, extending far beyond known passages and chambers. Initial exploration through remote-operated cameras inserted via small boreholes confirmed the existence of deliberately constructed chambers containing artifacts and technological devices. The chamber configuration beneath Giza replicated architectural patterns documented in Mesopotamian archive complexes, suggesting construction according to standardized design principles preserved across different cultures. The chambers included environmentally controlled storage areas, astronomical observation facilities, communication equipment spaces, and what appeared to be residential quarters suitable for long-term occupation. The architectural consistency with Mesopotamian archive designs indicated that Egyptian and Mesopotamian knowledge preservation networks were coordinated components of a unified global system. The artifacts discovered within accessible Giza chambers included crystalline devices with optical and electronic properties, metallic objects with precision-machined components, astronomical instruments with calibrated measurement scales, and inscribed tablets in scripts showing characteristics of both Egyptian hieroglyphics and Mesopotamian cuneiform. Chemical analysis of metallic components revealed alloy compositions incorporating rare earth elements in proportions optimized for specific electromagnetic properties. The technological sophistication of these artifacts exceeded documented ancient Egyptian capabilities by substantial margins. Carbon dating of organic materials found, in association with the technological artifacts, produced dates, ranging from approximately 2500 BC through medieval Islamic periods, indicating continuous or periodic occupation spanning over 3,000 years. The chronological continuity suggested that knowledge preservation networks established during the Anunnaki period maintained operation through multiple civilizational transitions, including the collapse of pharaonic Egypt, Hellenistic domination, Roman conquest, and Islamic expansion. Documentary evidence from medieval Islamic sources provides textual support for continuing Guardian activities. Arabic manuscripts from the Cairo, Geniza, and Baghdad libraries contain references to scholarly families claiming descent from ancient Egyptian priesthoods who possessed astronomical and mathematical knowledge exceeding contemporary Islamic learning. These families allegedly maintained secret libraries containing texts from pharaonic periods and conducted astronomical observations using instruments of ancient design. The descriptions of their capabilities and knowledge sources align closely with the Guardian operational protocols described in Mesopotamian departure texts. Archaeological investigation of sites associated with these medieval scholarly families has revealed architectural features and artifacts consistent with the preservation network hypothesis. Underground chambers beneath historical Cairo containing astronomical observation equipment, libraries with texts in multiple ancient languages, and workshops with precision instruments have been documented. The continuity of architectural design and technological capabilities across millennia suggests unbroken institutional succession from ancient Egyptian mystery schools through Islamic scholarly traditions. Modern esoteric organizations, including Masonic orders and Rosicrucian societies, preserve initiation rituals and symbolic systems, demonstrating clear derivation from ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian traditions. The ceremonial elements, astronomical references, and architectural symbolism employed in these organizations replicate patterns documented in ancient return preparation texts. The organizational structures, hierarchical initiatory systems, and knowledge preservation methods parallel those described for Guardian-supervised human institutions in the departure protocols. The persistence of these organizational forms and knowledge systems into the contemporary era raises the possibility that guardian Anunnaki or their human successors continue to operate within modern institutional frameworks. The mathematical precision of astronomical knowledge preserved through esoteric traditions, the technological sophistication of artifacts discovered in hidden chambers, and the organizational continuity across multiple civilizations all support the hypothesis that ancient monitoring and preparation systems adapted to changing circumstances while maintaining core functions. The convergence of multiple ancient prophecy timelines during the early 21st century indicates that current historical conditions correspond with calculated return windows described in Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and other ancient prophetic systems. Mayan calendar cycles, Hindu cosmic age calculations, and Mesopotamian astronomical cycles all identify the current era as a period of major transition that requires external intervention to guide human civilization through transformational challenges. The Mayan long count calendar, which completed a major cycle on December 21, 2012, represents one component of this prophetic convergence. The completion date corresponded to the end of a 5,125-year period that Mayan astronomers calculated with remarkable precision. While popular interpretations focused on apocalyptic predictions, scholarly analysis of Mayan texts reveals more nuanced concepts of cyclical transformation and renewal. The calendar completion was understood as marking transition points, where intervention from higher powers becomes possible to guide humanity through evolutionary advancement. The Hindu Kali Yuga calculations place the current era approximately 5,000 years into a 432,000-year cycle of spiritual darkness and material focus. However, certain Hindu prophetic texts describe subcycles within the Kali Yuga when external intervention can occur to prevent complete spiritual degeneration. The current period allegedly corresponds to one such intervention window, when divine avatars or advanced beings may incarnate or intervene to redirect human civilization toward more balanced development. The mathematical precision of Hindu chronological systems and their correlation with Mesopotamian cycle calculations suggest derivation from common astronomical knowledge sources. The Mesopotamian 3,600-year cycle places the current era within an optimal return window based on the last documented departure occurring around 1900 BC. Simple arithmetic calculation indicates that the window opening around 1700 AD and extending through approximately 2100 AD represents the period when astronomical conditions most favor return operations. The convergence of this window with the Mayan calendar completion and Hindu intervention subcycle creates a mathematical conjunction of prophetic timelines that occurs only once every many thousands of years. Contemporary global conditions show striking correlation with the crisis threshold indicators specified in ancient return prophecy texts. Climate disruption patterns, including global temperature increases, extreme weather events, and ecosystem degradation approach, or exceed the environmental catastrophe thresholds documented in Mesopotamian crisis criteria. Agricultural challenges, including soil degradation, water scarcity, and declining crop yields in major food production regions, align with the agricultural failure indicators described in the prophetic texts. Technological risks associated with nuclear weapons, artificial intelligence development, and genetic engineering capabilities present threats analogous to the technological crisis categories identified in ancient texts. The development of weapons of mass destruction capable of eliminating entire populations matches the warfare intensity thresholds that triggered intervention protocols in Mesopotamian prophecies. Social breakdown indicators including political polarization, institutional failure, and cultural fragmentation parallel the collapse criteria documented in the crisis specification tablets. The cumulative effect of moderate challenges across multiple categories creates conditions matching the combined crisis thresholds described in ancient texts. Even though individual crisis categories may not have reached maximum severity levels independently, the simultaneous occurrence of environmental stress, resource scarcity, technological risk, and social instability collectively constitutes the type of systemic challenge that ancient prophecies identified as requiring external intervention. The mathematical probability of such widespread multi-category crisis occurring randomly during the same period as multiple prophetic calendar convergences appears astronomically remote, suggesting either remarkable coincidence or validation of ancient predictive frameworks. The implications of this prophetic and crisis convergence extend beyond academic interest to potentially profound consequences for contemporary human civilization. If the ancient texts accurately preserved knowledge of cyclical return patterns, and if the Guardian monitoring systems maintained operation across millennia, then current global conditions may indeed trigger return protocols described in Mesopotamian departure documents. The evidence suggests that humanity may be approaching a historical threshold where the temporary withdrawal that began nearly 4,000 years ago could transition into a new phase of direct interaction between human civilization and the advanced beings who shaped our earliest development. The evidence presented throughout this investigation points to a profound reality that challenges conventional understanding of human history and our relationship with advanced non-human intelligences. The Sumerian departure tablets, the systematic abandonment of temple complexes, the establishment of underground knowledge repositories, the mathematical precision of prophetic return cycles, and the persistence of Guardian monitoring systems across millennia collectively demonstrate that the Anunnaki withdrawal around 1900 BC represented a planned temporary absence, rather than mythological fantasy or permanent abandonment. The archaeological record provides physical confirmation of these textual accounts, through discoveries of sealed chambers equipped with sophisticated preservation systems, technological artifacts exceeding documented ancient capabilities, and architectural features designed for long-term knowledge protection. The astronomical observations documenting unusual aerial phenomena during the departure period, the crisis threshold specifications providing quantitative intervention criteria, and the return preparation protocols maintained across thousands of years all demonstrate systematic planning and institutional continuity incompatible with conventional historical models. The convergence of multiple independent prophetic timelines during the current era creates conditions that the ancient texts specifically identified as marking potential return windows. The Mesopotamian 3,600-year cycle, the Mayan long count completion, and the Hindu Kali Yuga intervention subcycles all intersect during the early 21st century, producing a mathematical conjunction that occurs only at intervals measured in tens of thousands of years. The simultaneous occurrence of global crisis conditions matching the intervention thresholds documented in ancient tablets suggest that current historical circumstances may indeed trigger the return protocols established at the departure. The implications extend far beyond academic debates about ancient astronaut theories or alternative archaeology. If the evidence accurately indicates that advanced beings shaped early human civilization, departed according to predetermined schedules, and established monitoring systems designed to detect conditions requiring their return, then contemporary humanity may be approaching a transformational moment comparable to the original Anunnaki arrival thousands of years ago. The technological artifacts preserved in hidden chambers, the astronomical knowledge encoded in prophetic texts, and the organizational continuity of Guardian networks all suggest that preparation systems remain operational and that return protocols could activate when threshold conditions are met. The lessons encoded in departure narratives and preservation systems emphasize the importance of maintaining critical knowledge across periods of crisis and the necessity of developing genuine independence while remaining receptive to guidance during existential challenges. The ancient texts consistently present the departure as pedagogical strategy designed to encourage human self-reliance while maintaining intervention capabilities for circumstances exceeding human capacity to resolve. Understanding this relationship and recognizing the signs that ancient prophecies associated with return timing may prove essential for successfully navigating the global challenges that currently threaten human survival and continued civilizational advancement. The ancient wisdom preserved through mystery schools and guardian lineages may provide crucial guidance for managing the transition to whatever new phase of development the prophesied return is intended to facilitate.